I came in to finish some work, but staying late meant more than just deadlines. She was focused, commanding, and then her assistant had other plans for me. The office was quiet, almost eerily so, the usual hum of activity replaced by the soft whir of computers and the occasional creak of the air conditioning vent. It was late enough that most of the staff had long since gone home, leaving a hushed stillness that seemed to amplify every sound. The male narrator stepped inside, his shoes clicking lightly on the polished floor. He carried the faint weight of exhaustion from the day, yet there was something compelling about being here now, in this liminal hour when the office felt like a different world entirely. He noticed her immediately. She was sitting at her desk, completely absorbed in her work. His boss, a woman in her early 40s, moved with a quiet grace that seemed effortless. There was an elegance in how she adjusted the papers in front of her, how her fingers lingered over the keyboard as she typed, and even in the faint way she leaned forward, resting one elbow lightly on the desk. The male narrator felt a pang of admiration, and something more subtle, something he struggled to define. It wasn't just attraction, it was a deep respect, mingled with curiosity, and an almost forbidden fascination at seeing her like this, unguarded yet poised. The office smelled faintly of coffee, lingering from the thermos she had apparently been nursing for hours. The aroma wrapped around him in an almost comforting way, grounding him in the space, yet also stirring a quiet, unspoken tension. He could hear the soft tapping of her fingers, the rustle of papers, and even the faint creak of her chair as she shifted. Each small sound made him more aware of her presence, of the way she filled the room not just with movement but with a kind of quiet authority. He walked past her desk, pretending to focus on his own work, yet he couldn't help but steal glances. Her hair, dark and glossy, fell just over her shoulder in a way that caught the dim office light, highlighting the curve of her neck and the subtle lines of experience that only made her more intriguing. There was a warmth to her movements, a rhythm to her focus that made him feel both included and excluded at once, like watching someone dance just out of reach. He noticed the subtle details, the way she pushed her glasses up the bridge of her nose when reading a document, the soft exhales she let out when a task was completed, the quiet confidence in her posture even as her shoulders carried the invisible weight of responsibility. Each observation made him more aware of the distance between them, the unspoken rules of professionalism, and yet it also drew him in, made him want to linger a little longer, to savor the small intimacy of simply being near her. As he settled into his own workspace, a quiet anticipation built. He knew the night would stretch long and empty, yet there was a strange comfort in that shared solitude. Just being in the same space with her, watching, noticing, feeling, was enough to awaken a tension that simmered beneath the surface. The office, with its muted lights and faint scent of coffee, became a place suspended in time, where every glance, every small gesture, felt magnified. And in that silence, he realized, staying late wasn't just about finishing work. Something else was unfolding here, something delicate, quietly charged, and entirely unexpected. The soft hum of the office was suddenly punctuated by another presence. He hadn't noticed her arrive, but the assistant was there, leaning casually against the edge of his desk, a mischievous tilt to her head that suggested she had been watching him for some time. She was younger than his boss, closer to his own age, but there was a self-assuredness in her posture that made her presence impossible to ignore. Her eyes held a spark of curiosity, playful and perceptive at once, as if she could see exactly what he was thinking before he even realized it himself. She started with something casual, a teasing remark about how late he was staying. Her voice was light, carrying easily across the quiet room, yet it held a subtle warmth that drew him in. "You really like living at the office, don't you?" she said, her lips curving into a faint, knowing smile. The comment was harmless on the surface, but there was an undercurrent, a gentle challenge, a thread of flirtation that made his pulse skip. As she moved closer to show him a document on his screen, their shoulders brushed lightly. It was brief, almost accidental, but the warmth of her arm against his lingered longer than it should have, leaving him aware of the space between them. The faint scent of her perfume floated in the air, sweet and subtle, something that clung to the edges of the otherwise sterile office environment. He tried to focus on the work, but her proximity made it impossible to ignore the small, intimate energy that had suddenly entered the room. She leaned over slightly, pointing at the screen, and for a moment, their faces were closer than they had any right to be. The soft glow of the desk lamp caught in her hair, and he caught himself studying the curve of her jaw, the light in her eyes, the way her expression shifted with each word. She laughed at one of his tentative comments, a quiet, musical sound that seemed to ripple through the still office, and he felt a warmth bloom in his chest, unspoken and immediate. Her touch, though casual, was full of intention. A hand resting briefly on his shoulder as she straightened, the brush of her fingers as she passed him a folder, the accidental touch of knees as she shifted in her chair, all small gestures that carried a quiet intimacy. He became acutely aware of every movement she made, of the way she seemed to occupy the same space yet create a private world around them both. There was a tension, subtle and unspoken, that hovered between them. He couldn't deny that her attention was flattering, and yet it made him restless, aware of the contrast between her light-hearted energy and his boss's calm, commanding presence across the room. Each glance he stole toward his boss reminded him of the unspoken hierarchy, of the boundaries that must be maintained, but the assistant's proximity and playful teasing made it increasingly difficult to focus solely on work. By the time the printer finally hummed to life, delivering the documents she had sent him for review, he realized that the night had shifted subtly. What had begun as a routine late shift had taken on a different shape, one filled with laughter, lingering glances, and the faintest touch of intimacy. He knew, in that quiet, suspended moment, that this night would be more than just work. Something had changed. And he could feel it in the brush of her hand, the sparkle in her eyes, and the small, teasing smiles that seemed designed just for him. It started as an ordinary moment, him reaching for a folder on the edge of the desk, her leaning over to guide his hand, but the ordinary quickly became charged. Their fingers brushed, lightly at first, a brief contact that seemed almost accidental. Yet in that fleeting touch, there was a warmth that lingered, a sensation that ran deeper than either of them expected. He could feel the subtle pulse of her hand against his, the softness of her skin, and the faint tremor of awareness in her fingertips. It was nothing overt, nothing inappropriate, but it made him acutely aware of the space between them and the electricity that now hummed quietly beneath the surface. She laughed softly at something he said, the sound so easy and unrestrained that it contrasted sharply with the quiet, almost reverent focus of his boss across the room. He found himself leaning just a fraction closer, drawn not only by the sound but by the warmth she radiated, a warmth that wasn't physical alone, but emotional, a shared comfort in the quiet late-night hours. Her eyes met his for just a moment, and he noticed a flicker of something unspoken, curiosity, playfulness, maybe even the hint of an invitation. The assistant shifted her weight, brushing her knee against his again, subtle and fleeting. He felt the heat of it as if it left an imprint on his skin, and the brief contact lingered in his awareness longer than it should have. Every small movement she made, the tilt of her head as she leaned over his screen, the gentle brushing of her hair from her face, the faint, almost imperceptible scent of her perfume, seemed amplified in the hushed office. It was as though the quiet around them magnified every detail, turning ordinary gestures into moments that felt intensely intimate. He found himself noticing the little things that had always been there but now felt meaningful, the soft rhythm of her breathing, the gentle curve of her smile when she caught him staring, the way her hands rested lightly on the desk, poised but unguarded. Even the casual way she leaned closer to point at a line on the screen sent a shiver of awareness through him, making his heart beat a little faster and his thoughts wander in directions he hadn't intended. She moved back slightly, just enough to give them space, yet he could still feel her presence as if it lingered like a warm shadow beside him. Her laughter, her easy conversation, the way she shared small details about her day, it all wrapped around him, creating a cocoon of intimacy in the otherwise empty office. The contrast between her lively energy and the steady composure of his boss made him feel pulled in two directions, each with its own allure. For a brief moment, the office didn't feel like an office at all. It felt like a suspended world, one in which every glance, every touch, every fleeting brush of skin mattered more than deadlines or responsibilities. And in that delicate, unspoken space, he realized that something significant had shifted. The night wasn't just about finishing work anymore. It was about noticing. About feeling. About the quiet intimacy of sharing a space with someone who seemed to understand him, to tease him, to awaken sensations he hadn't even realized were waiting. And with every small, seemingly insignificant touch, the slow burn between them grew hotter, though still subtle, still restrained, still entirely theirs. He hadn't noticed it at first, too absorbed in the subtle tension with the assistant, but now he found his attention shifting across the room. His boss, poised and confident for most of the day, moved with a deliberate grace that suddenly revealed hints of fatigue. She stood, stretching lightly, the smooth line of her back visible beneath her blouse, the faint weight of long hours pressing subtly on her shoulders. Even in her composure, there was an unmistakable fragility, a glimpse of the human side she rarely let anyone see. She poured herself a cup of coffee, the small motions meticulous and soothing in their precision. The sound of the liquid pouring into the mug echoed softly in the otherwise silent office. He noticed the way her fingers curled lightly around the handle, the gentle tremor when she lifted it to her lips. She exhaled slowly, a quiet sigh of relief, as though the brief pause allowed her a moment of release from the constant demands of her position. He felt a surprising pang of protectiveness, a desire to offer comfort without crossing boundaries. As she turned, her gaze met his briefly. There was no overt invitation in her eyes, only a soft acknowledgement, a hint of gratitude that made his chest tighten. For an instant he saw her not as the formidable boss who commanded respect in every meeting, but as a woman with her own quiet struggles, carrying burdens with dignity and grace. Her smile was small but genuine, the kind that hinted at both warmth and weariness, a delicate blend of strength and vulnerability. He found himself drawn to the subtle details that often went unnoticed, the slight furrow between her brows as she concentrated, the soft exhales she let slip when a task was completed, the delicate sway of her hair as she shifted her weight from one foot to the other. Each gesture spoke volumes about the years of experience she carried, the resilience and poise she maintained even when exhaustion threatened to show. And yet, beneath it all, there was a tenderness, a human softness that seemed reserved for these quiet, unobserved moments. The male narrator felt a complex mix of admiration, respect, and a quiet longing. Watching her now, he realized that his fascination with her wasn't rooted in mere attraction, it was the depth of her presence, the way she navigated the world with subtle power, tempered by an unmistakable vulnerability that invited empathy. There was a magnetic pull in the contrast, the older, composed, commanding woman, and the fleeting glimpses of her private self, gentle and unguarded. Even as he felt the warmth and teasing energy of the assistant nearby, he couldn't look away from the quiet humanity of his boss. She moved with a soft rhythm, the faint scent of her perfume catching in the air as she returned to her desk. Every gesture, every glance, seemed to communicate unspoken stories, of responsibility, of past struggles, of wisdom gained through experience. And in that suspended moment, he felt a deepening awareness of the age gap between them, not as a barrier, but as a space filled with possibility, subtle tension, and a profound respect that only made the attraction more complex and compelling. In the hush of the late-night office, he realized that this wasn't just about finishing tasks or catching up on work. It was about noticing the quiet strength, the hidden vulnerability, and the magnetic presence of someone who seemed untouchable and yet, in these private moments, achingly human. The night had grown heavier with emotion, and he felt, more than ever, that he was witnessing something rare, something worth savoring in silence. The assistant leaned back slightly in her chair, a soft smirk playing at the corner of her lips. "You've been at this for hours," she said lightly, as if the observation were casual, but there was a teasing undertone that made him sit up a little straighter. The office was still quiet, the muted glow of the desk lamps casting long shadows across the floor. He could feel the weight of her gaze, not heavy, but attentive, as if she were studying him with quiet amusement, and maybe a little intention. "Maybe a break is in order," she suggested, her voice gentle yet filled with that same teasing warmth. She moved closer to the edge of his desk, just enough that their knees brushed lightly. The contact was subtle, almost accidental, but it sent a small ripple of awareness through him. He was acutely conscious of the heat of her leg against his, the faint pulse of energy that seemed to hum where they met. It was the kind of touch that lingered in thought long after it ended, stirring feelings he wasn't sure he was ready to name. She picked up 2 paper cups from the kitchenette area, the aroma of coffee strong and comforting in the quiet night. As she handed him one, their fingers met briefly. The contact was fleeting, but the warmth of her hand lingered, and he felt an odd mix of surprise and something softer, a connection that had been building for hours now, moment by moment, touch by touch. Her smile, small and knowing, seemed to acknowledge that unspoken current between them. Sitting beside him at the small break table, she leaned just slightly closer than necessary, her shoulder brushing his. The closeness was deliberate but subtle, and the warmth radiating from her was nearly tangible. She shared stories in a voice that was soft, intimate, and easy, anecdotes that made him laugh without trying, that made him feel as though this quiet office had transformed into a small, private world just for them. The subtle scent of her perfume mixed with the rich coffee aroma, creating a sense of comfort that felt both inviting and electric. Even as they joked and laughed, he noticed the micro moments. The way her hand lingered near his when reaching for sugar, the gentle tilt of her head as she watched him react to a story, the soft brush of her hair as she leaned to pick up a notebook. Each gesture was understated, yet laden with intent, building a slow, delicious tension that pulled him in. He felt a magnetic draw toward her energy, playful yet intimate, light yet charged. At one point, their eyes met and held a fraction longer than necessary. There was no overt declaration, no spoken words of desire, but the silence between them hummed with unspoken recognition. He felt the warmth of her presence as though it were a current moving through the space they shared, subtle but impossible to ignore. The night, already heavy with quiet emotion, seemed to stretch around them, magnifying every glance, every laugh, every fleeting touch. By the time they returned to their desks, the air between them was different, thicker with tension, warmer with possibility. What had begun as a simple break had become a delicate dance of attention and intimacy. The assistant had taken the first, bold steps, and he realized, with a mixture of excitement and apprehension, that the slow burn of connection they shared was far from over. The office was nearly silent now, the dim light of the late evening casting long, soft shadows across the desks. The male narrator had just returned from the kitchenette, coffee in hand, when a sudden flicker of light caught his attention. The overhead fluorescent had dimmed, then gone completely, leaving only the warm glow of his computer screen and a small desk lamp. Darkness settled around them like a soft curtain, and for a moment, the world outside the office seemed to disappear entirely. The assistant shifted beside him, her presence suddenly magnified in the intimate glow. He noticed the faint catch in her breath as her hand brushed against his while reaching for a document. The touch was brief, almost accidental, yet it made his pulse quicken. The darkness and quiet transformed the ordinary gestures of the office into something heavier, charged, like a delicate wire humming with electricity. Every movement she made, the tilt of her head, the soft laugh escaping her lips, the slight shift closer as she adjusted the papers, felt magnified, imbued with unspoken intent. Then the boss appeared, having returned to check on the office, and for a moment, the air tensed with professionalism. She gave a brief, tired smile that hinted at both gratitude and weariness. Watching her, he felt a deep admiration, the kind that went beyond mere attraction. She carried herself with grace, even in exhaustion, a quiet power tempered by vulnerability. It made him realize that respect and desire could coexist, each heightening the other. With the boss distracted, the assistant leaned just a little closer, her shoulder grazing his arm in a way that was subtle, yet deliberate. Her eyes met his across the small space of the desk, and for a heartbeat neither spoke. Words felt unnecessary. In that silence, their shared awareness hung between them, curiosity, teasing, warmth, and something unspoken that neither was ready to name aloud. He could feel the warmth radiating from her, the faint brush of her hair as it caught the lamp's light, the soft scent of her perfume mingling with the air around them. Finally, she broke the silence, her voice low but steady. "It's strange, isn't it?" she murmured. "How quiet it gets when everyone's gone, and yet it feels like there's so much happening." Her words were innocent on the surface, but the undertone, the glance that lingered, the subtle weight of her hand near his, carried a tension that made his chest tighten. He responded, his voice softer than intended. "Yeah, it's different. More real, somehow." He realized that in the quiet darkness, stripped of distractions, they were seeing each other in a way that wasn't about work or responsibility. It was about presence, closeness, and the slow, undeniable pull that had been building for hours. They worked side by side, sharing small, seemingly mundane tasks, yet each glance, each touch, each smile carried weight. Their hands brushed again while reaching for the same pen, and this time, the contact lingered just a heartbeat longer. It was enough to make him aware of the slow burn that had been growing between them, the playful teasing, the warm laughter, the subtle touches, all coalescing into something that was quietly, irresistibly intimate. And in that dim, suspended moment, he realized, this night wasn't just about finishing work. It was about understanding, feeling, and acknowledging, without words, that something significant had begun to take shape between them, a connection that neither time nor hierarchy could easily contain. The office had grown quiet again, the soft hum of electronics filling the space as the night deepened. Outside, the streetlights cast a warm, amber glow through the blinds, flickering gently across the polished floors. The late-night intensity that had defined the evening seemed to soften, settling into a calm rhythm. He glanced between the two women, the boss still composed but with a softer, more human edge now visible in the quiet moments, and the assistant, whose playful energy had slowly shifted into something gentler, more intimate. They gathered their things, the assistant nudging a stray chair back into place with a teasing grin that lingered in his mind, and the boss straightening her blouse with that same poised elegance he admired. Despite the unspoken tension earlier, there was a newfound warmth in the room, a quiet understanding that whatever had been building over the evening had found its place, subtle yet undeniable. The male narrator felt a tug of gratitude toward both women. Each had shown him a different side of connection, his boss with her quiet strength and understated vulnerability, the assistant with her playful warmth and gentle proximity. Together, they had shaped an experience that was more than just a late-night shift. It had become a moment suspended in time, filled with shared glances, small touches, and silent understanding. He noticed the lingering details, the subtle language of affection that required no words. The brief brush of the boss's hand against his as she collected her papers, the soft smile that conveyed unspoken acknowledgement. The assistant's shoulder resting lightly against his as they walked to the exit, the fleeting warmth of her hand brushing his arm. Each gesture was understated, yet carried an emotional weight that resonated deeply within him. These touches, these quiet interactions, had become a language of their own, one of trust, respect, and an emerging intimacy that was both tender and electrifying. As they reached the lobby, the trio paused. The night outside was still and quiet, the kind of calm that allowed the subtle magic of connection to settle fully into awareness. He felt a sense of fulfillment, a quiet joy in the shared laughter and glances that marked the end of the night. No words were necessary. The feelings were clear in the gentle smiles, the slight lingering of hands, the way their eyes met just a fraction longer than usual. In that moment, he understood something profound about human connection. It wasn't about rushing or forcing closeness. It was about noticing, about feeling, about allowing moments to breathe and expand naturally. The slow burn attraction, the delicate flirtations, the gentle vulnerabilities, all had merged into a harmonious whole. He felt a sense of balance, of warmth, and a quiet thrill that this night had opened possibilities without disrupting respect or boundaries. As the women walked toward the exit, he lingered for a heartbeat longer, savoring the final warmth of shared presence. Their goodbyes were soft and light, a hand on the shoulder here, a glance there, but each carried an emotional resonance that lingered well after the office doors closed behind them. The night had ended, but the connection remained, quietly humming beneath the surface, ready to grow with time, attention, and shared moments. For the first time that evening, he allowed himself to breathe fully, content in the knowledge that what had begun as a routine late shift had transformed into something deeply human, subtly romantic, and profoundly lasting.